All right, to the panel. I'm joined by Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs, Gideon Rosner, and Labor MP Joel Fitzgibbon. Gideon, Joel, thank you both for coming on the program tonight.
Thanks, Chris.
Great to be here.
I've got to say, I watched what was going on in Parliament today. One side getting stuck into the other side for claiming a comeback. I did feel a sense of accomplishment, though, Joel Fitzgibbon. I felt that the country, less the politician, but certainly the country, had created this day where we could basically say we are well and truly coming back.
Oh, I think that's right, Chris. I think just about every Australian can give themselves a pat on the back. We've come through this pandemic quite strong, certainly relative to most countries around the world. There are always exceptions to the rule, but most people have been very patient with the lockdowns, understanding that health comes first. They've been responsible in all of their actions, and of course now, happily, they're out there spending their money.
Yeah.
Chris, and consumption was very strong in the national accounts today, and that is a good thing. I just had a very short holiday up the New South Wales North Coast, and it was nuts. Domestic tourism is just going off. You can't get a room, you can't get into a pub for a beer, and it's a great thing for our domestic economy. And again, I think the people who can take most of the credit are our people.
Yeah, very true. Gideon, the Treasurer says China is not the key to the nation's recovery. I've got to say they weren't saying that kind of stuff in the years leading up to this year.
No, but we've all woken up, Chris, and myself included with that. I was somebody who thought, like many other people, that the more China develops economically, the more its civil and political freedoms will come through as well. Sadly, I was wrong. The fact of the matter is we are now in a new Cold War, and what we have to determine now is how much we are willing to do to protect our sovereignty and our democracy and our independence, but how much of the livelihoods of exporters and of people who are dependent on China have to bear from that. Now, Madeleine King, the Labor spokesperson, made the point this week that we shouldn't have spearheaded the pursuit of China over the coronavirus. Now, I personally don't agree, but that's a reasonable point to make. The problem is this comes from a party that has maintained for years, ever since I can remember, that we have to be a world leader on something like climate change, exporters be damned. So there's some very important conversations to be had going forward. But the most important thing Josh Frydenberg said today was this is not the end of our economy, it is the beginning. We have a lot of reform we need to the economy so that we're match fit to compete and to find those other markets that we need.
I want to go to Victoria because what has happened today flows into Victoria a lot. We know that if Victoria had opened a little bit earlier, we would have even hit 5%, which would have been just unheard of. But the Andrews government minister today refused to condemn the gross fake image tweeted out by the Chinese foreign official. This is the MP Danny Pearson. He played a key role in negotiations with China over Victoria's Belt and Road deal. However, the Premier thankfully did. He was appalled by it, but he's not walking away from his Belt and Road deal with China. Have a look at what he had to say.
This relationship's far too important to farmers, to manufacturers, to workers, to profits for Victorian companies and therefore prosperity for our state.
Joel, tell me, we've got legislation going before the Senate tomorrow, which may make it permissible for a government to cut this deal in its tracks, and I'm talking about the deal that Victoria has with China. And on top of that, he's just heard what the Chinese have done in terms of that fake image. Should he walk away from this now?
First of all, Chris, Danny Pearson was wrong not to criticise and indeed condemn the tweet, and Daniel Andrews was absolutely right to talk about the importance of the China relationship, particularly in economic terms. I was laughing about what Gideon made reference to. I was sitting in the Parliament when Abbott signed the free trade agreement with China, and that was going to be our nirvana. It was the most important thing, according to Tony Abbott and his ministers, that's ever happened in the Australian economy. And now apparently it doesn't matter very much at all. So you'll excuse me for seeing the irony in all of that. But look, we're supportive of the government's moves to secure and shore up our national security. I've said many times that this government has mismanaged our trading relationship with China. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't always be fiercely defensive of our national interests and our values. But a good government can walk and chew gum too. A good government, and many governments of all political persuasions, have stood firmly by our national interest for many decades, since Whitlam, but still been able to maintain a strong trading relationship with our major trading partner.
OK, but within days, the federal government may have the power to tell Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews that the Belt and Road deal is over. Should he walk away from it now before that even happens?
Have you ever read the Belt and Road Agreement, so-called, Chris? I haven't.
No. I've got the white pages at home. I'd probably prefer that, I think.
No, it's a very short document that makes statements of principles about how we might facilitate Chinese investment in infrastructure in that state. There's nothing too sinister about it, I can assure you. And look, I don't like the federal government stomping all over states' rights, by the way. I don't like that much the idea that Scott Morrison or Maurice Payne is now going to be able to rip up contracts that universities have signed with universities, for example, in China. But Labor will always stand by or support reasonable propositions which protect our national interest. Of course we will.
OK. Gideon, we're now talking about the possibility of using this legislation to sever the lease agreements on the Newcastle and Darwin ports, which I think most Australians would agree with. Having said that, why shouldn't we be able to do that when you consider that the agreements associated with the World Trade Organisation have been broken by the Chinese in recent months?
Well, that's a very, very good question, Chris, and a very vexing one. Look, the idea of ripping up contracts, any contracts by an Australian government, makes me very, very nervous. It was wrong of Daniel Andrews to tear up the agreement for the East-West Link and pay $1+ billion not to build a road. I think there would be issues with Australia tearing up contracts even with China. China is a special case and the argument can be made for it, of course, but this raises the questions about the Belt and Road Initiative and why it's, the devil, I'm sorry to say, is in the detail with the Belt and Road Initiative. It's one thing to partner with a listed investment company based in the Netherlands or something to build a freeway. It is a completely separate proposition to accept what is effectively debt trap diplomacy, the kind of which we have seen, in which the Chinese lend money to developing countries, typically on very unfavourable terms, foreclose on those loans, and as a result own key strategic assets. I think we need to be a bit smarter than that, and we need to wake up. OK,
seeing that you've read the Road and Belt Agreement, Joel, is that what the agreement points to?
No, the agreement is a statement of principles only. It's a sort of first step, I suppose, in what might have been a deeper agreement. Now, I suspect that there will never be now a deeper agreement, given Scott Morrison's waving the big stick around. But I think the important thing here, Chris, is that we need to be very, very careful and determined, in fact, in all of our public policy development and pronouncements to ensure we don't discriminate against nation states. China, we should be no more fearful of China's foreign investment as we need be American foreign investment, as long as we've got a screening process which applies equally to all countries. And if that screening process runs up a red flag, then, well, we should take note of that red flag. But discriminating against countries is a mistake, and we've also got to be very careful about sovereign risk, Chris.
Each case on its merits.
If people think that, governments are going to tear up their contracts, whether they be from China or the United States, as a country reliant on incoming foreign capital, that becomes a real problem for us. OK. Gideon,
I'm going to discriminate on the basis of age here. Unlike Joel, you're probably likely to use WeChat or know even what WeChat is all about. What are your thoughts on the Prime Minister using WeChat to try and amend the narrative for Australian Chinese people?
Well, the Chinese can lob out a grossly insensitive and pretty disgusting tweet at us, then I suppose Scott Morrison is right to start fighting fire with fire. I think Scott Morrison should actually get people from his department. The Chinese have their bureaucrats tweeting images about us. Scott Morrison should start getting DPNC bureaucrats to tweet out pictures of Tiananmen Square, repression of Hong Kong, cruelty to Uyghur Muslims. And
de-escalate. Gideon, didn't you get the memo? He wants to de-escalate, he told MPs yesterday.
Well, I'm not sure how much that'll happen over WeChat going onto China's own social media platform. But the serious answer, Chris, or the serious point to it all, is that I suppose it is important for Australians to get on WeChat, not to talk to the Chinese government or people in China, but to talk to Chinese Australians. And as difficult as China is making our lives right now, we have to tell the millions of people of Chinese ancestry here who make a great contribution to this country that they are welcome, that they are valued, and unlike their homeland, they have absolute freedom here in the Commonwealth of Australia.
I'm glad you made that point, and you both made some sensational points on this issue tonight. Joel Fitzgibbon and Gideon Rosner, thank you both for being on the program.